Star Ocean 6. Star Ocean 6. Even now, having played the game, I still can't believe that that's a thing that exists. So, this review feels like an obligation of sorts, I guess, because it's Star Ocean. There was a time in my life when I called Star Ocean Till the End of Time the greatest game I'd ever played. Very long time ago, when I was much younger and much dumber, but still, regardless, that was a part of my life, and eventually led to who I am today. So, I had to know. I had to see for myself where exactly Star Ocean has fallen after all these years. Because, as most people who are at least somewhat familiar with the series would know, Star Ocean has taken something of a nosedive over the course of its life. I even did a whole video about it. Here's just a quick summary of that so you have an understanding of what my opinion is of Star Ocean going into this. Basically, Star Ocean was a solid game for starting off a series, but feels somewhat dated to play nowadays. Star Ocean 2 still feels a bit dated, but it's otherwise just a 100% improvement over 1. Better story, better characters, better gameplay, the whole shebang. Star Ocean 3 is complicated. It was a highly ambitious game with some stunning moments and some amazing gameplay design choices. However, it also had some questionable story decisions, feeling at times super predictable, and others just plain dumb. Also, if I ever have my own version of a non-flashback, this is the music that'll play over it. Anyways, Star Ocean 4 was terrible. Despite having arguably the best gameplay the series has ever had to offer, the plot was contrived, the humor wasn't funny, and the characters were bamboo under the fingernails levels of painful. And Star Ocean 5 was just there. Like, Star Ocean 4 makes me feel angry. Star Ocean 5 makes me feel... Star Ocean 5 doesn't make me feel, actually. I don't think about Star Ocean 5. It was basically a non-game, just as bog standard and forgettable as a game can possibly get. So, with that kind of build-up going into Star Ocean 6, to say I had tapered expectations would be an understatement. But there was a part of me, somewhere deep down, that hoped, that prayed, that maybe, just maybe, this would be the one that changed things. So, how exactly was the game? Well, first impressions were not good. After an exceedingly generic grunge rock opening, where they did nothing but show a bunch of in-game cutscenes, I was greeted with the bunch of plastic mannequin people I would be controlling for the rest of this game. Seriously, I'm pretty sure the characters from Till the End of Time were better at expressing emotions than these guys. And it didn't get much better from there. The game, at least on my PS4, had a bad habit of chug-a-lugging along whenever more than a handful of models had to move at the same time, and this was on the setting to prioritize frame rate. Can't imagine how clunky the game would feel if I had prioritized graphics. Which pushes further back into the general sense that this whole game feels rather cheap. Which isn't too surprising, I guess. I can't imagine this game had a massive budget or anything, but it certainly doesn't help things. On top of the unexpressive faces, the characters seem to have, at most, a handful of animations that they rotate through in every cutscene they're in. In fact, cutscenes in general feel very poorly made. There's this one scene I vividly remember where there's this villain who's instigating his big plan, which involves a coup and overthrowing an entire kingdom and the eventual execution of the king. And he's supposed to be giving this big speech to the people of the kingdom as he's executing the king, why he's right to do what he's doing, and so forth. It's supposed to be this big dramatic moment, and it's just... The game, can't bring that across at all. There's 6 people standing in the background. It doesn't look like a grand execution for a king. It looks like one-man stage play that had a really poor turnout. And that sense of cheapness permeates this entire game. Crafting is depicted through a still image of the character hovering over a generic screensaver. The game pads its length by making you constantly trek back and forth between towns you've already visited. The figurine sort of card minigame the game introduces is exceedingly basic, even by RPG minigame standings. Although, it was cool to get a Jack and Ridley figurine right away. Anyways, moving on. The voice acting is not terrible by any means, but there's a lot of times when I find characters seem to talk over one another. It just doesn't feel particularly well edited together.
No job is too big, anything from a single letter. All that jazz.
Precisely.
With such a convenient means of communication, I must say it seems a bit inefficient to limit oneself to ink and paper.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there.
The dialogue, too, feels very clunky. Not the worst I've ever seen, but it has this bad mix of feeling rushed at times while also constantly repeating itself, on top of the aforementioned talking over one another. So, that's it, right? It's a bad game. Star Ocean's dead, we can all move on with our lives, right? Well, I don't hate it. Even now, there's a part of me that questions that line of thinking, like, maybe I'm just in denial and just want this game to be good. But, I don't know, there's something there. Something that was missing in 4 or 5 that kept me playing the game. Okay, so let me preface this by saying I am by no means calling this a good game. It still has all the aforementioned faults, and then some. However, the game has some good qualities that can make it worth checking out. Let's start with the combat, usually the strongest part of any Star Ocean, and it's no exception here. The system builds off of Star Ocean 5's somewhat, doing the whole entering combat on the map rather than entering some sort of fantastical arena every time. However, one of the main problems with 5's combat was the camera, which has thankfully been fixed here, being far easier to control and letting you make sense of what's going on in the action. It still has problems when you're fighting in particularly clustered environments, but I find that comes up a lot less often. The combat itself consists of setting up a series of little combos for yourself, similar to Tales of Arise, for example, and you can switch between different combos freely midway through, allowing for all sorts of fancy shenanigans. However, unlike Tales of Arise, enemies do not have infinite HP, making fights last for absurd lengths of time. No, in fact, most regular fights are over in the order of maybe 20, 30 seconds at most. The whole combat system has this sort of emphasis on speed, which I gotta say I really enjoy. And to really emphasize that, the game introduces its main gimmick, as it were, in Duma, a little sentient floating ball that sounds like some sort of smart voice assistant. Duma allows you to pull off these high-speed dashes, which serve a variety of functions, such as traversing the world map and finding collectibles. However, it is also a key part of combat. And the fact that just about every fight in this game starts with a little girl clad in armor, dual-wielding swords outstretched, cannonballing headfirst into a swarm of enemies, it's honestly, it never gets old. In combat, Duma just really helps to emphasize the speed this game is trying to convey. If you kill an enemy, you can use it to quickly jump onto your main target. If you get injured fighting a boss, you can run to a corner, heal up, and then, thanks to Duma, be instantly back in the fray, swords swinging wildly. You can even do sort of short little side dashes every now and again to get behind or to the side of enemies. The game even rewards you if you time the dodges just right. On the whole, the combat is very simple, but surprisingly effective. It kind of reminds me of Kingdom Hearts in that way, you know? Despite most of it being just spamming a very straightforward combo, there's enough movement and dodging and dashing that the game feels rewarding despite its simplicity. But it is not just gameplay that saves Star Ocean 6, because if that were the case, then I wouldn't be nearly as harsh on Star Ocean 4 as I usually am. It's not the story either, though. The plot of the game is fine. It's severely hampered by poor writing, but taken as a whole, it gets the job done. And there are even a few genuinely interesting twists to keep you going. But I think what really does it for me is the characters, surprisingly enough. They come across as more relatable, I guess, than most previous Star Ocean characters. The main guy, Ray, when compared to similar protagonists Claude, Fate, and Edge, comes across as a lot less whiny. Sure, he's stuck on an underdeveloped planet with no means of rescue, but there's no real benefit in bemoaning the situation. He might as well get involved and help out the cute princess who's asking for his help. Speaking of which, Letitia, the alternate protagonist, ended up being a surprisingly intriguing character. Despite initially coming across as a rather demure, sheltered princess type, which she definitely partially is, she eventually establishes herself as a surprisingly competent leader, with convictions as strong as steel. There are a number of reasons why I enjoy these characters quite a bit more than previous installments, but I think the biggest reason has to be the return of the classic private actions. You see, the thing about private actions, or supports, or social links, or whatever the fuck you want to call them, is that they're actually really simple, but they're also quite easy to screw up. You see, all they really need to do is show us character personality or interaction that falls outside the scope of the main storyline. Star Ocean 4 screwed this up by turning them away from sort of character moments and more into skits with an emphasis on comedy, which can work some of the time, but when it's the only option it becomes very grating. While 5 went the more traditional route, but made them so paper thin that they didn't leave any impact whatsoever. 6 returns with much more of what I want. Simple, effective character moments. They aren't grand, well-written sections or anything. Some of them can be entertaining, but others tend to fade from your memory the moment you finish watching them. But they give you that little bit of extra something that turns a model, an assemblage of cliches and tropes in a weird little mannequin-like body, into an actual character that you can, identify with and care about. And that's what gets me about Star Ocean: The Divine Force. For the first time in a long time, I found myself rooting for these characters. Despite their vacant expressions, their flapping gums, their repeated movements, I found myself actually caring about the characters behind all that. And for that, I honestly was pleasantly surprised. Now, despite all that, I can't exactly recommend you go out and buy this game. At least not at full price. At the very best, I can call this game average. You won't necessarily regret playing it, but you also won't really be missing out on that much by giving it a pass. Maybe if you see it somewhere down the line a couple of months from now at like 60% off, but at full price, it's just really not worth it. However, as a longtime fan of Star Ocean, I can appreciate the direction the game has gone and the improvements it has made. If the series somehow continues after all this, and it continued after 5, so anything's possible, then, well, if they use this game as a starting point, they may very well create a truly magnificent Star Ocean. Till then, though, I'm gonna be bunkered up here, sifting through comments of people telling me my opinion of Star Ocean 4 is wrong. How can you pretend like FaZe is a good character? He's the literal definition of a stupid